Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this lunchtime's talk with our guests today. We have quite a few people already on the line, so we'll get a start. Liz, if you could just move us on. So my name is Samantha Charlton, and I work for AHDB Beef and Lamb, covering the North East region, working closely with our strategic farmer close to Hexham, Steven Lawson. Thank you, Steven, for joining us. And of course, Liz Genever, who's been working with Steven and I in the Strategic Farm programme. So thank you both for joining us today. Focus on today's talk will be around forage, looking at what Steven's already done, what he's in the middle of doing, and what he plans to do as we move into the autumn and winter. So plenty of things to talk about. I'll first run you through some of the technology. You are all only in listen-only mode, so if you would like to ask a question, if you can use your control panel, which is accessed via that orange button. If you click on that, it will open up your control panel, and then you will see a drop-down section with questions. If you type in your question there, I'll be able to pick them up at this end and put those questions to Steven and or Liz. Just as a reminder to use the question function and not the chat. We can't pick up questions from the chat box, please. Next slide. Okay, so what I'll do now is hand over to Liz. Liz can give you a brief introduction about how she's been working with Steve, and then she can run us through what we're going to cover off in the next hour. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Sam. Good afternoon, everybody. So what we're going to talk through today is these 5 points you can see on the screen. So the work that Steven's been doing on his grazing systems, how we're then being tracking growth rates of lambs and the performance of lambs, and also the ewe body condition score. We're doing a bit on how Steven has been measuring grass and also what forage crops he's put in for this season. So he's got some lambs on rape at the moment and then some kale for later in the year. We've also done a bit of work on nutrients, so trying to understand soil test results and then understand what nutrients need to be applied ready for the spring for some of those fields. And then, as Sam mentioned, we've also got some planning that's happening for the autumn and winter, particularly after quite a challenging grass growing year. It's been that sort of delightful mixture of very dry to very wet. So that's what we're planning to do. But to begin with, we have a poll to sort of get you warmed up in terms of just thinking a bit about grazing systems.
Okay, so if you haven't done this before, a bit of audience participation to get us going. This is the question that we're looking to ask you all. So which of the following best describes your current grazing system? You've got 5 options there. The same animals stay in the same field most of the year, also known, we describe that sometimes set stock. Stock move through the fields or maybe in the field for 1 week plus. Stock move through the fields moved at least once a week, or stock move through small paddocks moved twice a week, or the final option there, groups of stock are moved daily. So the polling question will shortly come up on your screen. If you'd all just like to make your selection. And I'll give you a couple of minutes to start making your vote.
So in terms of as people are answering that, Stephen, in what would you would be moving them? You'd probably be between C and D or B and D, depends on the time of year.
Yeah, definitely. And in the winter time, we're doing daily moves. Some are sort of probably three days, 4 days, sometimes 2 days, just sort of varying on grass growth and paddock sizes.
Yeah.
And has that always been the case, Stephen, or have you?
Probably
is that
yeah, this is the first time I've really done it more intensively, if you like, and measured grass. Did do it where I had them in a field for a few days, bunched a load of ewes and lambs together and over 3 fields and split them and rotated them that way. But it was just to kind of did it and see what happened without any science or measurements. But this time now, measuring the grass, measuring what they're going into, knowing what they're meant to be coming out at, probably just understanding a bit more of the usability of the grass. So yeah, and different stocks, depending what you have. Yeah, the ewes and lambs, don't be too hard. Make sure the lambs have plenty of grass later on, and also the ewes. And when we had ewes in the winter time, they were good body condition, you know, fit ewes. We're moving them daily. And just allocating their maintenance diet. So it's understand the condition of the stock that I've probably altered the way we graze a bit more as well, making sure them ones that are lean are getting what they need, and anything fitter can be held back, which helps build up grass for the leaner sheep.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Stephen. So you can see the results there now, Liz. Can you see those?
I can't.
Oh. Hopefully everybody else might be able to see, perhaps because you've got the screen. Stephen, are you able to see the results?
I can see this, yeah.
Yeah. So option A, Liz, then is 20%, B 30%, C 10%, D 30%, and E 10%. So B and D giving us our highest score there. All right.
And I think it was, thank you, and it was a bit of a tricksy question because as sort of Stephen alluded to, which is there's certain times a year and certain classes of stock that we can actually use all of them on most farms depending on what's going on. So certainly maybe not necessarily A, but certainly set stocking a field, so keeping them in for a period of time is sometimes useful, for if you're thinking about lambing systems, for example. But certainly, and part of grazing systems is having the sort of confidence to work out which is the best approach for the class of stock you've got and the field you've got and the size of the paddock, as Stephen mentioned. So it's quite interesting that we've got this sort of that range of approaches. So it was a bit of a tricksy question, but it gets warmed up.
Good. Thanks, Liz.
So Stephen, in terms of what you've been up to, so you've sort of, as you were saying, you've started doing splitting fields up in a more sort of I was about to say scientific way, but so you've been using this app, haven't you, in terms of just measuring fields so you can split them more equally?
Yeah, it's an app on the iPhone, Planometer. Found it really useful. You can do it from the house and work it out beforehand. Most of our fields are 20 acres or thereabouts, so we've been splitting them in half with a semi-permanent high tensile wire, then just linking on with plastic reels after that.
So you do the main, so in this example, so you've done that main split with high tensile, and then you'll do further subdivisions sort of crossways if necessary.
Just yes, that way it allows we're not pulling 300 meters, 400 meters of wire all the time. You know, just sort of that field there, you can see it's just about 150 meters, so it doesn't take long to put up and move, and also it just allows to, depending on the size of group of stock and what they are, we can just make cells to suit, if you like. Yeah, if that, yeah. You know, we might have.
Sorry.
Go on.
No, and have you started to notice that? So is the grass sort of composition, so the sward's getting better, do you think, after that? Are you grazing them differently?
Yeah, I think it's been a funny old year with weather-wise, and it's probably been more in the back end when we're getting some rain that I've realised that the rest is probably as important as maybe the graze, not to be grazed too hard down, and we'll reset some of the fields with the mower, and just trimmed it off and just left it, and it's just rotted away, and them fields have come away with real good quality. But having that rest's allowed that plant to get up to its maximum.
Yeah, so it's and I suppose that, and because you've done further sort of paddocking, you can give more grass a rest, can't you, rather than sheep wandering over most of it.
Yeah, and that's definitely where we're finding it's rest in these fields is just allowing you to get a better, denser sward of quality grass as well. So it's definitely seeing it working in the later the summer now.
And so you just got, these are just some of the images. So that's sort of showing your sort of the high tensile line, isn't it, running through the centre, and then just sort of your plastic fence or fence post sort of doing the cross section.
That's what we're using to link up. And also, you can see in this picture there's some springs in the high tensile. They're at 20 meters away. Was going to try 25 meter spacings, but to get over it with a bike, you just stand on it and drive over it, or just drive over the bike, and it just springs back, and them springs hold tension, so saves time. You can go from cell to cell very easily. Yeah.
And then in terms of, a lot of the questions are about fencing, but also, and so at the moment, you can see from the photo on the screen in terms of some of it's still battery powered. And some of it is on hot wires or not?
Yeah, some of it, that's the sort of plan going forward. Try and have as much on of the mains, if you like. Over the road, we'll have to probably stay on batteries because there's no. We'll find a way of getting it over eventually, but at the minute we've just got batteries. But yeah, so that way, if the wires are all on, it's just you link on, and you don't have to worry about the batteries going flat, because if the batteries go flat, the stock then encourages them to creep.
It's like Jurassic Park. And also water comes in, doesn't it? So you've got, and again, the picture on the screen shows the sort of temporary water you've put in.
Yeah, because that's needed. Especially when you've got sheep and you get plenty of grass. Earlier on, the ewes and lambs definitely drink a bit, but later on they drink very little because of the moisture that they're getting out of the grass, and that's worked well. IBC tank, just gravity fed into a water trough, just works off the ball cock, and just keeps them ticking over. And it's
sorry.
I was just going to say, it's easy to move it from cell to cell. As you can see in that picture on the right, I can move that into 4 different bits, or just drag the trough across the field into another cell, without having to move the tank, as long as it's going downhill.
And so in terms of sort of plans for over the winter, have you got things you would like to improve ready for next year? Or have you identified areas that just need a bit of maybe more investment or time spent on them over the winter?
More fencing, going to try and get a bit more water. Quite a lot of our farms naturally fed off waterways, so we're going to have to, just for water pipes into certain fields. But the electric fence, and I see that on the few fields that we have got the high tensile in, saves us a huge amount of time when we're setting different cells up. So that's definitely a must to get some more fields split up, because we can see the benefit of the fields being rested and being able to allocate stock in different fields.
Ideal, thank you. And so we're just sort of, and then this year, well, you've historically been very good at tracking. You've been weighing lambs previously, haven't you? In terms of, you've got. Oh, sorry, Sam. There might be some questions on the grassland side.
Yeah, there was. Yeah, sorry, Liz. If I just butt in for a second, can you just confirm again the name of the app you've been using, Stephen?
Planimeter. PLANIMETER. And I'm on an iPhone. I don't know if it's on other phones or not, but I'm using it on an iPhone.
Okay, thank you. I think that's free. It's our northern accents, not doing us any favours there. Don't apologise. Yeah, and you answered some questions there around other people are struggling with the water system. So I think that answers that question as the conversation went on. Just another question around grass quality. you obviously adopted this new system and talking there about making improvements for it for next year. Presuming that's because you've seen a difference in grass quality, Stephen?
Yeah, definitely. As I said before, it's more later in the summer now. The weather has improved. Some of the ground was very droughted out. But in saying that, probably from giving that ground a rest and not allowing the covers to be burned off has probably allowed it to fast forward more in the later the summer, rather than other times we would have probably just left things where they are, but we managed to keep things moving. So I think having the rotation, leaving some of them fields with a bit of cover, stopped them drying out, and you know, got going again in the back end quicker for it.
Good. And that in turns reflected on stock performance? There's another question that I've reworded it, but
yeah, you know, the lambs, well, the yows were quite lean through the summer, to be fair to the yows that had been working, and the lambs had kept on doing well. I think after weeding, the lambs had just slowed down a bit, but we're going again now. But I think a lot of it's just been all weather related a lot, and the yows are starting to pick up in condition there now as well.
Good, okay. Which probably leads quite nicely onto your next bit, Liz.
Thank you. And so yeah, this is just looking at the sort of some of the numbers that Stephen's been sort of has been calculated off his growth rate. So you've changed your system, haven't you? Sorry, you've changed your weighing system. You've bought some new kit that makes it quicker.
Yes.
But in terms of, so as you said, so lamb growth rates up to weaning was about 270 grams a day on average, and then after weaning they dropped a bit, and there's a bit of a differential on the rape. So I didn't know whether you wanted just to talk through why do you think they dropped?
I think the lambs dropped. I think just I think a lot of people in the area, the lambs didn't do quite as well weaning. Just took the time to get turned around. We got a bit of wet weather, and things just seem to stand still. They've started going forward now. We've just had this batch away now. They've come to good weights, and all on grass they were. Yeah, I think it probably just weather related as much as anything.
Yeah, and we do have short memories, don't we, in terms of what it was like summertime. During the grass was in certain places brown and crispy, so it was quite challenging to get that good grass for them to go on. And then certainly you had some worm challenges, didn't you, early on, and then you've just recently used Zolvix on those lambs, which could hopefully will then push them up again in terms of growth rates.
Yeah, on one batch we had a real hard hit with Nephrodirus on a batch of lambs, which has really knocked them back. Need to look a little bit more closer at that data to see ones that's left, but I think it'll find that it's had a long-term effect on them ones, so it'll be interesting to see in that batch that's stored on the computer to the growth rates that I would imagine have dropped back because of the Nephrodirus on them. Also the lambs on the rape, they were the lesser lambs, they were the smallest lambs, they'd never had the growth rate, but we also had a rain scald on them, so I think that's probably just kept the growth rate back. And another bit of an issue I've found is a bit of lameness on them. I think putting it down to the stalks and that, but nothing too bad. But we seem to have needed regular foot bathing on them and pull any problems out as soon as we've seen them.
But you've also got, it's the delight of an average, isn't it? But you've also got lambs that are doing really well on the rape as well. It's just, as you say, there's the bottom end are just not doing as well as you would expect.
Yeah, it's a bottom end, but then we've had some lambs that's going away on the that's just been killed yesterday. I don't know the results yet, but some of them lambs are getting up into the 42s and that off the rape. So you know, some of them had done well. So you know, it's the rape's done well.
And so just in terms of your numbers of lambs, so you've sold, well, you sold 458 and then another 190 have just gone. they were slightly heavier weights, as you mentioned, and then you've got about 520 left, including some ewe lambs. So
Yeah.
how are you planning to manage them now? So some are on the rate we just talked about, rest are on grass. And there's
Yeah,
particularly lambs we look to with
they've
that.
actually just come off the grass, sorry, off the rape, so they're all onto grass. They have been dipped, so it's going to be middle of November before we can get them away. So we'll just be rotating them around on grass, and once the middle of November comes down, we'll look to get hopefully a big chunk of them away. And in that time, the rape is resting. So they'll be able to go back onto there at some point. Yeah, it's just recovering a little bit at the minute.
Yeah, we've got a couple of pictures, haven't we? We'll talk about that in a second. So, but in terms of the numbers that you've got on farm this sort of time of year, that would be probably lower than normal or around normal for what you'd expect lamb-wise.
We're probably roughly about the same. We started selling a week earlier, but I probably sold lambs a little bit later because who thought the trade was ever going to end the way it was? And drought, we could say we didn't have huge amounts of grass, so you know it was a bit good price, sell them light. They were still coming to better money than the previous year, but it was also just to get some mouths out the ground to help a bit of grass for the other ones.
Yep. And then you mentioned, some of your ewes were working hard really, weren't they? So by weaning time they were leaner than you would ideally like, but it's just trying to get so in terms of, we were talking about 40% of them were leaner really at weaning that you would like, but you've probably, and then you need to go through them again, but that's probably now 15-20% of those that are slightly,
yeah, I would say around
under
about the 20% mark there. We're still 6 weeks away from tupping, so we've still got time to, I think they're on target. To be fair to the yows, they've worked. The lambs have still grown well on the weaning weights, but the yows have put their all into the lambs.
Yeah, and so you, in terms of those lean ewes, so that have you been wormed, or what have you done in terms of intervention on those leaner ewes?
Going forward, we've had blood and trace elements done. Cobalt was slightly low, selenium was fine, and iodine was low, so we're going to iodine drench with them and a cobalt. And some of the ground that they've been on, it's could be possible fluke, so we're thinking with it being such a dry weather, they've been into every nook and cranny, so we're going to fluke the yows as well.
And that all of them, or just the lean ones?
Just the lean ones.
Yeah, and just see, because again, as you say, you've got a period of time that they could still be putting condition on, and certainly through tupping they could still be doing
and
some.
Actually, just worm checked the yows the other day, the group that's the leaner ones, and they only had 100 egg count, so they're not going to be bothering them.
Okay. I don't know, Sam, is there any questions on the lambs or ewes at this stage?
Yeah, there is, Liz. Yeah, thank you for that. So just a question, first of all, it was kind of in between what we're talking about here and previously, but Stephen, just could you tell the audience what the split is that you have between temporary and permanent grass on the farm?
All the rented,
just roughly it'll be.
well, the only, it's 40 acre, so that's then
A rough figure,
it's
Stephen.
a rough figure, 50-50 with
right,
the rented
okay.
ground.
Okay, and is that what is your reseeding policy? If you
always try to do roughly about 20 acre every year. We used to do half arable and used to use that as a grass rotation, go to arable crops and back to grass. But now I would like to try, I've liked the way the rape's gone. It's had its few little problems, but what the rape's also done for us is by growing such a good crop, it's allowed the grass to get away. So I'm certainly keen on doing that again this next year and using that as part of the rotation. So yeah, try and do about 10, 20 acres a year, whichever fields. And that's one thing with splitting these fields up, it can make them more manageable sizes to do rotations. If you know, you can do a smaller field, like if the weather's right and you've got the grass, you can do a bigger field.
Yeah, okay. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that further on with Liz. And then the only other question for this bit, Liz, was Stephen, you mentioned that you put some of the smaller and I think some of your medium-sized lambs onto the rape. Was there a reason for that?
When we weighed the lambs at the time, the reason, and partly Liz can maybe answer this a bit as well, if they went under the rape, the ones that was bigger, if they went onto the rape, they maybe wouldn't have enough time to get their body used to the rape. They were obviously still thriving well on the grass, so rather than shift them off the grass and leave them thriving, put the smaller lambs on that needed to grow, and they were going to have more time to get I'm not sure the correct word.
Transition
onto them. Yes, I.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, we normally work on sort of 2 to 3 weeks of getting that diet shift really, and so we just thought that anything that was close to finishing weight, just there was a risk that would actually drop weight off them. So actually just leave them on the grass, the sort of the heavier lambs, leave them on the grass rotations, and then use the rape to sort of grow those animals a bit more really.
Okay.
That was the plan.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that.
So just we'll move on to this. So as part of the project, Stephen's been looking at pasture cover. So this is the amount of grass that we've got across the whole farm. And so at the end of every month, Stephen just sort of goes for a walk around and just gets an idea of how much grass is on that farm. So this is how much sort of every month, how much grass has been on the farm since January. So you can see January time was about 1,000 kilos across the whole farm, which is probably 2 to 3 centimeters. So it's low really. So 1,500, as you can see a picture, is probably around about 4 centimeters. 2,000 is where we're sort of heading towards 8-9 centimeters, so just above your ankle. So you can sort of see that, and then we've sort of alluded to, which partly because of weather, is that this year that grass hasn't really got away, in inverted commas. I mean, hasn't got to that sort of a comfortable place until probably June, July time of this year. And so you can see actually we've had this big rally in the last couple of months to get it to where it is now. So it's sitting just over 2,000 as we head into the sort of end of September. So that sort of explains probably some of the issues we've seen around leaner ewes than we'd like, and probably lamb growth rates aren't quite where we need them to be. So it was a combination of, because of other things in terms of how low it was when we started the year, and then add to that cold, wet spring, then that magical dry period that triggered in. So it was a combination of factors that then led to this sort of grass not quite being as plentiful as we would like, sort of from late spring onwards. But that was probably seen on quite a lot of farms this year, that combination of very wet to very dry within about 3 weeks. So I don't know whether, Stephen, are you the sort of, well, talk through in terms of the process that you go through, and are you finding it useful, or is it just an extra job that I bully you into?
It's no, I definitely find it useful. I just use the stick meter. And now I've been doing it that much, I kind of can quite guess what there is in the fields just by looking. But it makes you take a measurement and makes you think of how much you've got there and what you've got to get on it, you know, what stock you might have to put on or where you need it to be. I think it does make you think, and it's also interesting looking at the projections of what you have against what your demand is of what stock numbers you have. So, you know, all that is interesting. And generally I just have it on the bike and just driving around the field. I've got a clipboard and just take some measurements and write them down, and you know, so just does take a little bit longer, but you can just do it as you're checking the stock.
And I think, I suppose also, because one of your ambitions, isn't it, is to do sort of lambing outdoors, sort of at
Yeah.
sort of set stock paddock. So part of the work is actually thinking about how high do we need to get it to in the autumn to make sure you've got enough grass coming into that spring. So sort of to try and avoid this situation when we're coming into the new year with it very short everywhere. But I know, and we'll talk about that in terms of plans for autumn winter, but you've put some different plans in place, haven't you, to try and help with that?
Yeah, also what doesn't help us in the winter time, some of the rented ground we'll lose, so I can't graze that. So it makes for a higher stocking rate in the winter time. So yeah, well, sorry. We're lamb outside all the time. The sheep are outside. But what we were hoping to do is get them into a set stocking system. Normally we've gone in, last year we used a sacrifice field, which is a field that the rape's been put into. So the idea would be to have them set stocked out across the farm and onto the rented ground, because we get that back in April. It would save shifting stock around, and so that's the aim, to get as much built up of grass.
Don't know whether I froze or Stephen's froze. We'll keep going.
And back again.
So, and part of that is to, I suppose, the ambition of getting them to be set stocked come lambing is that we need that pasture cover to be sort of nearer 3,000, 4,000 as we're getting into sort of into March time. So we weren't far off, but there just needs to be that couple hundred more coming into the new year, really. So that's part of what we're working towards on the farm. And so what I should have said is that those pasture covers also are on reduced areas, because, as you said, you took out a field for kale, didn't you, and also rape or a reseed. So you've got a reduced area, but you've still managed to sort of maintain that pasture cover targets, really. And so we've got a very exciting image of the kale going in on the left hand side, and then the rape going in, and then the kale coming up.
Yeah, that's the kale which was direct drilled.
So that's on the right hand side.
Yes.
And so what the field that has kale in it now was just not performing as well as you'd expect, and it was time to try something else.
Yeah, it's been in a few years, and we're keen to try and winter some cows out on it. Could say earlier on there was going to be a shortage of grass possibly, and straw crops weren't looking that great, so it's come into a good crop. And yeah, silage crops were okay, and straw's pretty ordinary, so we are short of straw this year, so hopefully that's going to help out.
And then if we just go on one more, which is then that's the rape as it's coming through. So that was, so you put and you can see the reseed label. So it was like a medium term mix, wasn't it, in terms of grass mix, with then just half a kilo
rape. Half a kilo of rape. Yeah, it's a 4 farmers mix. So yeah, it's come really well. And even though the rape probably should have been a bit less, it actually rained just after we drilled it, and it got to a really good start. But the grass is still there in the bottom. We're concerned about the rape drowning the grass out, but the grass is done okay.
And that was some of the challenge potentially you experienced this year with some of those lambs. There was a bit of photosensitization coming in, so that's when the head swell up and then potentially the ears go a bit crusty. Because it was that balance, wasn't it, that the rape was getting quite ahead of the grass. So the risk was you needed to knock the rape down a bit to make sure the grass got some sunlight, and then it's just a grazing sort of the time between drilling to when those first animals go on. But we were basically on it, weren't we, in terms of 80-90 days from drilling, so it wasn't far off, but it still was actively growing, which could have caused some of that upset.
I think if I was another time, we'd probably look at maybe just quarter of a kilo a hectare, and you still get a good covering of rape, but it maybe wouldn't be so dense, and you'd maybe be able to leave it a little bit longer without having an negative effect on the grass underneath.
Yeah, and I think, and also, we've moaned about how dry it was, but this, you had almost optimum conditions, didn't you, as you put this in? So it just grew like billio.
Yeah, it's a south-facing field. It's quite fertile. Yeah, and it was a perfect storm for a good reason, and just flew.
Yeah. And so then we've just got there is the slide of sort of it being paddocked up to a certain degree. So you sort of block grazed it and across, and you can see that's the kale, isn't it? The field of kale that sits below the field, sort of as you head
Yes.
towards the stream at the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's actually, I didn't realise how well rape recovered, because we have grown it years ago, and it just kind of gets eaten off, and that's it. But with giving it its rest, you can see the cell that'll be closest to you looking at it in the middle of the screen, how green that is from recovering. And so it went along there to the left of your screen, then down and back around to your right and back up again.
Yeah, and there's areas, of it's interesting because that could that have been of where there was silage bales or something in the winter?
The spots,
Yeah.
it was actually. I did have a little problem with the drill at that point, but it's what it.
There was a photo
Yeah,
earlier showed the circles from before when it wasn't in rape
yeah,
yet, so it
yeah,
could have
you're
been from.
but I did have a little problem with the drill as well. So
Don't we all? So yeah, so that's the sort of, so the rape is, it's sort of, it's been an interesting experience, hasn't it? But again, but that hasn't put you off. It's just next time you do things slightly differently.
there's been positive and negatives. More positives. The lambs, with the issues that they had, I would know about it quicker next year. With the swollen ears, I actually thought some of them just been stung by wasps at the start. So if we're seeing that happening, and maybe different group of lambs to try, maybe try more the middle group of lambs rather than ones that's never really been doing as well. So yeah, no, it's the positives. It's allowed by growing such a tonnage of dry matter on there, it's allowed a lot of lambs to be off grass, which has helped build it up now. So we're looking quite well for grass for keeping them.
And again, so you've got a bit of regrowth on that rape, and so another sort of one more rotation round, and then that sort of also then tidying up that reseed ready for the winter.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. And then this is one of your pictures of the kale. So again, it's looking like a really nice crop.
Yeah, again, yeah, I think we didn't realise how hard the weather was on we're quite a heavy farm, but I was a little bit concerned earlier on, and once we got into the rain, it's fair filling out now. I'm quite pleased with it.
And we've done sort of a calculation because the plan is to put some cows on, isn't it, in terms of maybe 20 or so cows. And so we're starting to do calculations based on, reason is looking. Well, you sent me, I forgot to put the one in which was the reference point, which was an electric fence stake. So it's some of it's up to nearly the top of that, isn't it? So it's a fair crop at the minute.
Yeah. Most of it's sort of 4 or 5 inches off the top of a normal size plastic fence stake, and some of it's that and above.
And so it's looking, so 20 cows with a bit of straw going in, looking to be sort of like 60 odd days on there.
Yeah.
So it's, again, those sort of calculations will be adjusted as we get better in terms of yield sort of measurements on it. And then by the time, because those cows will be coming on sort of November time, won't they? So we'll just have a fair idea of how much is in front of them at that stage.
Yeah, and the idea of after that it'll go back to grass in the springtime. That's the plan for that.
And just again into like a medium term lay, and then it's just part of that rotation.
Yeah, and it's a bit of fresh grass again.
So Sam, is there any questions on that before we then move on to the poll? Next poll.
So just quickly, Stephen, can you remind us of the establishment dates for the kale and the rape? When did you put them in, did you say?
June, I think. You have that, Liz. Should have had this ready, shouldn't I?
Just when we try and find the photos.
Yeah, I think.
So did you? Are you talking about the kale first, or the rape?
So the kale would have gone in June time.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the rape into the grass was just a few weeks later than that, probably early into July.
Yeah, yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
roughly
great.
that. Yeah,
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
10th of June for the rape.
Yeah, I will defend Stephen and say we'll have those dates. Just in a different book in that kitchen bench, I can see.
Yes.
And just a question for you, Liz, just a grass-specific question. Anything that we can do to prevent rust getting into the grass at this time of year?
A lot of the time it's actually driven by nitrogen, so it's just got short of nitrogen, which allows that disease to come in. So it's got a sort of susceptibility to that rust coming through. So one thing is obviously not at this stage, because unless in an NVZ perspective it's if you've passed the close period, but certainly looking to nitrogen into the autumn would help it. There are certain varieties that are more prone to it. So again, if it's within a reseed or it could be reseeded, it's something to look for. Just to check for more rust resistant type varieties if you've got that problem locally. And sometimes it's also to do with how you've got leaf area that's been obviously available for that rust to take hold. So then also just think about how you graze it before that rust starts to come in every year. But a lot of the time it's to do with nutrients that are just making that plant more susceptible to disease.
Okay, great. Thank you, Liz. So we'll move on to the audience poll and make sure that everybody's still listening. This is the testing point. So we'll show you the question again on the screen before I share it. So what do you do? Do you take, before we start talking about soil, that is, if you're wondering why this question's been posed, do you take soil samples primarily for nutrient status? Do you dig holes and look at soil structure? Do you dig holes to look at those lovely worms? Or do you look at nutrient status as well as structure? Or do you score full points and do all of the above? So honest responses only, please. And I'll share that all with you now to make your selection. So just give you a couple of minutes. So Stephen, what do you do then?
Been doing it all. And
the right answer.
Yeah, and before we're part of the being a strategic farm, to be fair, we've always kind of tried to do about a third of the farm every year for soil testing, because we've heavy ground and ran quite quite tightly with winter stock, and we've found quite good results with like a flat lifter subsoiler type machine. So we've looked at soil structure to see where compactions are, and actually did do an earthworm test, which was quite good.
Good stuff. Okay. All right. So everybody's voted now, which is great. It means that they're still here. So if we share those results, Liz, I'll share them with you.
Thank you.
47% have said that they take soil samples primarily for nutrient status. 12% dig holes and look at structure. 6% have a look for the worms. 12% look at nutrient status and soil structure, and 24% say they do everything. So
interesting.
A and D being the A and E, being the highest scorers there. Is that all right?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
And so what we're going to talk a bit more now about is this more to do with the nutrients. So certainly Stephen and I, one of the focused areas for this winter is to then collect more information about structure and also sort of earthworms and other factors. So soil organic matter, for example, things like that, just to get an understanding of what's occurring on the farm at the moment. So what we like to see So then when we had a bit of a wander around sort of within the autumn, we sort of, and you saw it quite frequently on quite a lot of farms at this sort of time of year, which is this quite patchy areas. So you walk across fields and you've got sort of these high green, slightly higher sort of areas of grass, and then around it is sort of a lower area. And a lot of it's to do with basically looking at nutrients that have been supplied by either urine or feces. So it's deposits from the animal really that has then been used by the grass to grow higher. So we always look quite enviously at them because you just thought, well, if we can apply that amount across the farm, it'd all look green. We have to realise that those, particularly urine, is highly concentrated in nitrogen. So it's probably not justifiable to apply that level of nitrogen that is deposited in those urine patches. But it was just particularly noticeable in one field at Steven. So a soil test was done sort of to see what had happened. And as part of the project, Steven had those soil tests done previously, and it was showing that there wasn't a huge issue from a P and K perspective, and pH was okay. So the soil tests were redone, and you can see them on the screen. So pH was coming back at about 5.7, and what we're really wanting to see for grassland is between 6 to 6.3. So there's a bit maybe need in terms of a little bit of pH or lime is required on some of those fields. P was 2.2, so where we needed to see potash K was at 1.7, so nearish to 2, and magnesium was high. So it's locally high and also high history of mag lime being used. So that magnesium level is driving some of the structural problems that we sometimes see on Steven's farm, just because it tends to cause the structure to be quite tight. So the soil is naturally happier when it's got high levels of calcium in. So for that pH to be adjusted, we would definitely be looking to apply calcium-based lime rather than any mag lime. We don't need any more magnesium in this system at all. The soil tests that were done were also had a bit more detail in them, and also showed low sulfur levels and low sodium levels in that soil. Sulfur is required for plants. It's quite an important element, part of the chlorophyll molecule, so it's required within that, and also has this relationship with nitrogen. So to use the nitrogen well enough, there needs to be sulfur in that system. So that, but we can see that some sulfur has been applied to that field previously this year, so we just might need to look at the sulfur applications that are being used. Sodium, so salt, is generally used it basically changes the animal's preference for eating that. So we can apply salt to grassland, and we can shift animals' sort of preference they just basically have a salt preference, so then they utilize that grass better. It's a very long-winded way of saying they like grass that's got salt on it. So that's something to sort of probably look for, particularly in this field. But from like the major mineral perspective, so the phosphate and potash isn't a big issue. There's a little bit of a query around pH and this bit of a query around sulfur. And so what on this field roughly this year is about 112 kilos of N has been applied. That's not product, that's actual N that's been applied, and about 25 kilos of sulfur. Some of that has come out of manures, so obviously it can be a bit changeable, but that's roughly where we are. And according to the sort of RB209, this field's only really been grazed, so we're looking at applying anywhere between 20 to 30 kilos of sulfur for up to 100 kilos of N is applied. So we've achieved that, but we've applied just over 100 kilos. So it might be that we need probably a doubling of the amount of sulfur that's going onto that land next year, and that might help some of it. But it will be interesting to see whether we can try and reduce this patchiness by just sort of looking at that nutrient application a bit more, I suppose. Does that make sense, Stephen? Or but you're saying it's now getting back to, it doesn't look like this anymore.
No, it's leveled itself up, and I still don't know if some of it's just to do with the extreme weathers that we've had, through the drought, whether it's just been harder on everything than when we realise, because now since we're getting some good amounts of rain, it has freshened itself up. There's none of these there's little patches, but nothing to what it was like.
Yeah, and it could be that they're just the nutrients are happily moving about in the top bit where there's moisture, isn't it? And they're just not moving around the whole profile. So it could, as you say, it adjusts itself in time. But
Yeah,
certainly the sulfur application is something to watch for when.
yeah, just a bit extra.
And it's not that to be fair, your soils aren't hugely prone to sulfur. We tend to be thinking light soils in a high rainfall area, and yours are heavy soils in a medium rainfall area.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're that prone, but it's probably something to keep an eye on for next year. And then the other thing, just in terms of nitrogen application rates, is that what we saw from Steven is that for grazing land, the yellow box you can see on the graph is where where you're applying for grazing land. So just over 50 kilos of N was being applied on grazing land on average, but for silage land you were getting up towards 200 kilos per hectare. And this graph comes from RB209 and just shows the sort of trajectory of what yield will be against application rate. So as you go up here, you're applying more nitrogen, and as a response, you're getting more yield. So again, what Steven's applying is where you'd expect it to be for the type of land he's on. Plus, there's obviously some white clover in that system as well that needs to be thought about. But it just shows you in terms of it's just a nice reference point of where you are applying some nitrogen, but it's not in excess for the amount of grass that you're aiming to grow. So Sam, is there any questions on the nutrient side, or we'll just quickly move on to future plans really?
Yeah, we've got one question, Liz. Well, we've got a couple, but we'll just cover one, and then we can hopefully have time to cover the last section. But will sulfur levels in soil samples increase over time if S is routinely used, or will it need to be applied at these levels permanently?
The challenge with sulfur is it's really, really easily leached out of soils. So if you take a measurement in the autumn and it's okay, there's a risk that it might have been, particularly if it's a wet winter, it might be that it's been removed off through that, like washed out of the soil. So there's another way of testing for it, which is actually on leaf tissue, which is a lot of people would do it. So you can test how much actually the plant's able to extract out of the soil, which is another way of doing it, just to check what's going on as well. So the soil test for sulfur is a snapshot as ever, but again, just be careful. If it's been a particularly wet time, the sulfur can disappear. But then if sulfur is coming out of sort of deposits from animals as well, so that's why the difference between grazing and silage land in terms of the requirements is because it's coming through the animal's feces as well.
Okay, thank you, Liz. I'll leave you to move to the next section. Thank you.
So this the next bit is sort of Steven's talked about that we were doing. So what we're trying to do is predict in terms of what the winter might be like in terms of how much pasture covers on that farm. So we've made this is a sort of example of what Steven's supply and demand might look like. And again, as we go through the winter, we'll update what that supply is doing. So it's assuming we've basically got no grass growth in January, which may not happen. So it's just this sort of, so that the blue line, sorry, is basically grass growth, and the red line is the stock that's on grass. So these are as Steven mentioned, his sheep stay outside all winter. So it's his sheep that are on the grass, and his cows are housed, which is why it drops in November, and they start going out again up here. So we can use this piece of information about what's happening over the winter to sort of have a prediction forward of what pasture cover might be like in the spring. So if we have a look at the next one, so you can, the image I showed earlier was actually what has happened this year. So we've gone from about 1,000 and we've sort of tracked up to just over 2,000 at the end of September. So this is now looking at a prediction forward. So at the end of October, the farm might be sitting around about 2,000. We have to think that at this time of year, normally from the 1st of October onwards, is we have this, the demand is generally higher than supply. So generally you'll get this reduction in pasture cover as we go through the winter, unless you're taking a lot of stock off that farm through that winter. So what we're seeing here is the prediction is that from sort of October onwards, we see this steady decline on Steven's farm, which is quite common for a lot of farms, and by sort of end of January we're about 1500, and that will hopefully keep slightly more level as we go into April. So the plan is that as we get into the beginning of sort of, or round about the beginning of April, we're sort of sitting just below 1500, which is sort of, as we discussed before, the sort of target we'd be aiming to get to. What we don't want to do is get back down to this sort of 1000 pasture cover, was what we experienced this year. So we want to go through and just take a couple more 100 kilos of grass across the farm per hectare. So what we're doing with this is that we'll use this to then, so every time now Steven does a pasture measurement, we'll then use it to track against what this prediction's saying, and if it's running higher or higher, we're in happy times. If it's lower, we have to start thinking in terms of what other options can we do. So I know, Steven, you've got some deferred grazing, haven't you, going in, or you've deferred some fields ready for block grazing with ewes, which will help to sort of protect some of this ground for that lambing time.
Yeah, we found that worked really well last year, so we've increased the area by up to about 30 acre. Last year we did just shy of 20 acre with that, so another third of the area again, which, you know, you keep all the time that they're on that field, that's letting the other fields grow away, so hopefully that helps out a bit to go into the springtime with a bit more grass.
So yeah, so we'll be tracking in the next few months in terms of what the benefit of that deferred grazing does, and sort of how that is then managed through that. And then the other thing, and we've sort of got to start planning this again for Steven's farm, but it's an idea that Jamie's very much talked about, or comes from Southern Ireland, which is this idea of a closing plan. And any of you familiar with spring block calving systems would be the same idea, that they're stockpiling grass to take through to the spring, and the same approach needs to be sort of thought about for sheep. So this is the sort of model on the screen of what the sort of suggestion is. So they would be, for an early March lambing flock, in this example, they would want by late October 20% of the area that's those sheep are going to be turned on to. These would generally be lambed in a shed and turned out with lambs. They want 20% of that area for turnout to be closed, so grazed off well, probably to 3-4 centimetres, 1500, and then the gate is shut. And then by mid-November, 40% of that area is shut up. By late November, 60%, and by mid-December, 80% is shut up. So it's quite nice in terms of, and again, for Steven, we'll be tracking this over the winter just to see what proportion of that area we can shut up without compromising other areas, I suppose. But the plan for this is that it's actually cheaper to feed ewes in mid-pregnancy where their requirements are lower than having to feed them in early lactation. So actually, to save grass by having to feed them in mid-pregnancy, but ensuring you don't have to feed them as much in early lactation, is actually more cost effective. So for Steven, sort of for mid-lambing, his sort of his proportions will be in sort of this sort of area that you can see on the slide. He mentioned Fair Spring, which is this area that he has to leave, and so that's quite useful because the gate is shut because the landlord wants him off, so that therefore become closed up. So that's quite, in this example, it's quite useful because then come turnout, it's then available to receive ewes and lambs.
Yeah.
Does that, in terms of Steve, I know this is a lot easier said than done, and where do those sheep go magically in December, but I suppose it's just having a think in terms of how practical it is on your land area.
It's that's where this deferred grazing, if you like, it's worked. We did half the ewes last year because never did it before, so worked really well. And it's rest in them other fields if we're fortunate for a bit grass growth to grow, if they can be on through that period of winter where grass is dormant, you know, not growing. Hopefully, if it'll get through that bit, then grass should start building maybe when they come off that.
Yeah.
Also last year we did the sacrifice field where we used bale silage and we just put all the sheep under the field. Again, wrecked the field, but it allowed the rest of the farm to rest, so it got more grass in the spring for when the ewes lambed.
Yeah. So there's so it's just working through the different sort of choices or options you've got, but you've certainly with those deferred areas, it's quite a nice option to have, isn't it?
Yeah. No, and that, again, that's where the rotational grazing is allowed, where to put bits off. There's could be a couple of the little cell bits that we might get away if we'll just let it get away if we don't need it, if the lambs get away a bit faster. So yeah, that's what I'm really conscious of, building up deferred grazing. It worked well last year.
Excuse you,
very
Liz.
subtle. I tried to move it away, didn't work. It's been building for a while. But yeah, that's done, Sam. Sorry, we've just over a little bit. Apologies.
No, that's fine, thank you. And it's really been interesting to see, watch Steven basically go from implementation of rotational grazing and starting to measure to now every time we have a conversation with Steven, he's thinking about the next stage and planning that out and using that information to make changes for what the next season, as it were. So I think as we monitor through the winter, Steven, you may not agree, but we'll find it really interesting to see how you deal with it, and if you do have to intervene. Hopefully we'll be in the happy place, Liz, but if you do have to make changes, it makes for better learning sometimes.
And hopefully a couple of months before it's really biting. That's the advantage of just tracking it as well. We get a bit more leeway into it.
Yeah, definitely. And something else that Steven's done and probably hasn't given himself much credit for is just the use of data and how you've been collecting more data and using that to inform your decisions as well. I know you've put an awful lot into that this year as well. So thank you, Steven, for doing it basically and letting us watch it along the way. And thank you, Liz, for giving us the technical advice and confidence. So just as a final close, really, just to let you all know where to find that additional information, everything is on our Knowledge Exchange library via the website. GrassCheck GB is a really good source of information if you're interested in grass growths and trends, as well as other information. Forage for Knowledge is a newsletter specifically, as the clues in the title, developed for forage. So if you're not signed up for that, please do so, and you can see there you also have access to webinars, podcasts, manuals, our YouTube channel, which are all completely free. So thank you all very much for listening. You will receive an email after this asking you to participate in some feedback. I really would appreciate it if you could just spend a few minutes to complete that. We do look at it, I promise you, and it informs us for our next series of webinars and activity. So please, if you can, fill that in. Thanks again to our speakers, and thank you everybody for listening, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.